So as Donald Trump, the former president, looks to win back the White House next year, he continues to promote and latch onto positions that are overall fairly unpopular with the American people. After posting on social media earlier this week, he was, quote, seriously looking at alternatives to Obamacare. Trump doubled down last night, writing, quote, I want to replace it with much better health care. Obamacare sucks. That's a candidate for you. But polling shows most Americans disagree with him on that. In May, the Kaiser Family Foundation found that 59% of Americans view the Affordable Care Act favorably. And since the bill was signed into law, all but 10 states have expanded Medicaid coverage, something made possible by the ACA. And it's not just health care, on which Trump seems to be out of step with the views of most Americans, although voters have repeatedly rejected election-denying candidates who claim the 2020 election was stolen from the former president. He continues to push the big lie online and at his rallies.
The radical left Democrats rigged the presidential election of 2020, and we're not going to allow them to rig the presidential election of 2024. We're not going to allow it.
See, it turns out people don't like that. They also don't like insurrections, it was found in some the midterms. Even though nationwide support, there's another one for abortion access is at 55%, one of the highest levels on record. Even though the issue has been undefeated at the ballot box since the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, Trump has repeatedly bragged that he is the one who got the landmark decision reversed.
President Trump is going to make a determination what he thinks is great for the country and what's fair for the country. But the fact that I was able to terminate Roe v. Wade after 50 years of trying, they worked for 50 years. I've never seen anything like it. They worked, and I was so honored to have done it. Well, I did something that nobody thought was possible. I got rid of Roe v. Wade. And by doing that, it put pro-lifers in a very strong negotiating position. Nobody did a job like I did, including Roe v. Wade, bringing it back to the states. And what I did by killing Roe v. Wade, which everyone said was impossible.
So, Mike Barnicle, let's get the quotes here.
Yeah.
I got rid of Roe v. Wade. I terminated Roe v. Wade. I was the one that was successful in killing Roe v. Wade. When around Congress, we'd always talk about, let's get out there. This is a 60-40 issue. This is a 70-30 issue. This is an 80-20 issue, which means positive, negative. Here, he's on the wrong side of every one of these issues. Roe v. Wade, 70% of Americans didn't want it overturned. And he's running around bragging about killing Roe v. Wade, terminating Roe v. Wade, getting rid of Roe v. Wade. It's the same thing with the Affordable Care Act. The Wall Street Journal editorial page again saying Republicans, if they don't have a better plan, they should just keep their mouths shut because they're going to lose at the ballot box if they do this. And the election denying, it speaks for itself. Think about all of those candidates we saw packages about and read articles about that were so dangerous because they wanted to be secretaries of state and of individual states, and they were election deniers. All the significant ones lost. He's on the wrong side of every single issue, and it's hard to imagine going through 2024 without seeing those clips thousands and thousands of times, because those clips are going to push people away from Donald Trump. Keep Republicans at home. Keep independents at home that would normally vote for him.
You know, Joe, most people watching this realize that whatever goal they might have in life, whatever goals they might have for their children, you don't put your car in reverse to get to the goal. You go forward. You know, it's easier to look through a big front windshield than the rearview mirror. That's what Donald Trump is doing nearly every day. He's looking in the rearview mirror. He's talking about the 2020 election that was stolen from him. He's talking about, and large elements of his party are talking about taking things from people. The right to choose, Obamacare, because he doesn't like the word Obama in care. All of those things are going to be to his detriment eventually. People want to know where we are going as a country and where candidates want to take us as candidates. What are you going to do in the future about my paycheck, about my children's education, from grammar school up through college? Where are we going? What would you do about the Middle East situation right now going forward? Not 20 years ago, not 4 years ago. Where are we going? And they can't answer that simple question.
And Susan Glasser, the White House, the Biden campaign, frankly, in conversations have been surprised by their luck with all three of the things we just showed right there. They didn't think they would get the gift of the guy they're probably going to run against next year, trashing Obamacare, which is popular as we've laid out, of taking credit for getting rid of Roe versus Wade, which we've seen for a couple of years now at the ballot box, has been a loser for Republicans. And also that clip we showed of him talking about an election stolen was on November 18th, 2023. It sounded like something from November 18th, 2020, but he's still talking about that. He's still talking about pardoning the people who attacked police officers on January 6th. He's leaning into these issues which may feel good to him in his echo chamber at his rallies on the patio at Mar-a-Lago when he's talking to the members, but he's trying to win a national election.
You know, it's an excellent point. I just keep thinking about Donald Trump's health care plan, which is always 2 weeks away, right?
Yes, 2 weeks.
It's 2 weeks. It's stuck with the infrastructure bill. They're working on it in the same office. Donald Trump, he's not disciplined, right? I mean, he wants to talk about what he wants to talk about. He believes that he's going to improvise and riff on whatever he wants to riff on. For the Biden White House, this is what counts as good news, considering that every minute he's talking about repealing Obamacare, he's not talking about high prices. He's not talking about inflation. He's not talking about the economy. He's not talking about the border, which is one of his other obsessions that does resonate with many Americans. And so I have to say, though, when I listen to all this long list of issues that, Trump is playing right into Democrats' hands on, it's shocking to remember, given all of that, how very close this race is. And, even the White House understands at best this is a dead even heat between two candidates. It's kind of astonishing when you look at this set of issues and that it's Donald Trump, right?
Yeah, and there are some new national polls this week show Biden up a couple of points. These come after some polls that show Trump up a couple of points. It's all within the margin of error. It's very, very close, to Susan's point. The campaign is aware of that. But these are gifts. They have been, to what Willie said earlier, the Biden campaign operatives are sending around messages. They're immediately tweeting about this. They feel like there's a real strong contrast here. And they've picked that up in the last few weeks. And instead of just selling a positive message, including Bidenomics, which didn't resonate, and as NBC's reporting, they're now moving away from using that word, at least in the president's speeches, they are now really suggesting that it's the choice between what we have now versus the extremism of Donald Trump. Do you really want to revisit that? And I don't think we should gloss over Trump again suggesting that the next election could not be conducted freely or fairly. He did it. He did it in 2016. During that summer, that was the birth of the big lie. He ended up not having to act upon it because he did defeat Hillary Clinton in the Electoral College. We know what happened in 2020. We know what happened on January 6th. He's already laying that groundwork again.
He's got a platform. It's the poisoning of the American mind.
I'll share something that I wrote in a column that was published this morning. In the Biden-Xi summit in San Francisco earlier this month, in the private conversations, I'm told Biden turned to Xi and said, "Don't believe the polls. You'll be talking to me in 5 years."
Oh, okay. Well, I've learned to believe him, too. The New Yorker's Susan Glasser, thank you very much for coming on this morning. And